Hi-ho! Welcome everyone to the Criterion Cut. Bloody good show.
That's your British?
Well, that's my English accent. Not my
English, sorry. My bad.
This lumping together that you asshole Americans always seem to do.
Look, I don't understand the difference between England, UK, and Britain. It's all just over there to me.
My name is Hawthorne. Of course his name's Hawthorne. Like, nothing could have been less surprising to me than this character in this movie being called Hawthorne, okay?
I like how, like, he is, in the movie, he is like a preppy British, like, scholarly gentleman, and you're making him sound like a pirate.
Look, I'm not good at voices, okay? But you have to admit, this guy has the most preposterous, over-the-top, stereotypical English accent. Like, he's a walking stereotype.
Oh, tally-ho, gentlemen. Shall we go out for the hunt?
Bloody good show. Ha-ha. Anyway, yeah, this is Criterion Cut, everyone. Welcome.
Oh, yeah, we're doing something.
This is a show that we do on the Patreons and stuff, where we review a movie from the Criterion Collection. And today we're doing something a little bit different. We're doing a comedy that ended up in the Criterion Collection.
Woo.
It's a mad, 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 mad world.
Yes.
I know it's 4 mads. I got it right.
It took me a while. I eventually got there. I just started singing like the theme song in my head just to like really get it right. But now I can do it by heart now.
I am far more scared of the 15 character names that I don't know.
Oh God, yeah.
But I mean, like, don't get me wrong. When I say that in the movie, I remember them all. They're all very distinct. They all have their own sort of look and kind of feel, and they all have their own way of speaking. You're never confused about who's who in the movie, but for discussing the movie, I feel like some of them you can describe easily with a simple thing. The mother-in-law is easy because she's the mother-in-law, but there's at least 5 guys that probably, unless you specifically start naming them, they're all just going to like sound like we're talking about the same person. So
you know how before Zack Snyder did Watchmen, everyone was always saying that Watchmen is like unadaptable. It's something that just like can't be put onto film, and some would argue it still can't be. That's how I feel about this review. Like, how am I supposed to discuss 7 different plot lines with 16 different characters all doing comedic things? Like, it seems impossible to review.
Yeah, it's the most epic comedy ever made, and there's an even longer cut if you can believe it. But yes, so this movie is from the 60s. Let me just 63. I want to say 63. I'm right.
Yep.
Yeah. From director Stanley Kramer, and it's a movie that it's not been remade per se, but there's definitely other movies that have largely taken the broad concept, which is there's some money somewhere and a bunch of people race across country to get to it. You know, I think Rat Race is maybe the one from my teenage years that came out with a similar kind of idea. This is the big, star-studded for the time. I don't know if you noticed this necessarily, but the aspect ratio, did you sort of catch that it was a little bit different than normal?
No, sorry, that's not something I usually pay attention to.
Yeah, well, it's wider than, so typically, you know, we tend to watch things in 1 of 3 ratios. This is not, you know, Netflix and streaming shows have kind of muddied this water because they've added a lot of in-between ratios. But typically you've got your 4:3, which is the square looking one. You've got your 16:9, which is close enough to 185 that you just kind of bundle it in, right? And that's where it fills your widescreen TV. And then you've got your anamorphic shot movies, which have the black bars on a widescreen TV because they're wider, right? And most modern movies are actually in that ratio because it looks nice and big cinematic.
Yeah, it's like 2.7 something, I think.
No, 2.4 to 1.
2.4, okay.
This movie, though, I think is 2.55 to 1, so it's actually a little bit wider. So you might notice a chunkier bars at the top and bottom because it was shown on like I can't remember the name for this particular projection style, but it was a big, wide release.
The film was promoted as the first film made in one projector, Cinerama.
Cinerama, thank you. That's the one. Because there was a few different like competing technologies at the time, and they were basically all scared that TV was going to make cinema like redundant. So they were all like, oh, we have to do fancy formats, we have to do these big vistas and all that. But because of that, this movie looks gorgeous. It is absolutely stunning to look at the entire time, because this big wide frame, there's a lot of like on location shooting in the desert roads of California, and it's all very, very pretty. And you've got all these characters who end up in a race to try and get to some buried money, which we'll get to the plot and the spoilers in a bit, and like why they know this, but that's the basic premise. And you've got just these different groups of characters who kind of swap around a little bit as the movie goes on as well, where some groups split up and end up teaming up with other people who they weren't originally with, and there's all that kind of thing. So
I really was a bit concerned at the beginning because there were so many names. It was like a 7-minute long opening title sequence, and there were so many names thrown around. After
I can't really call it an overture because it's more of a theme song, but it's an overture in the sense that it's just black screen and there's some music playing, which I think is just to, back in the day, tell the audience the movie's about to start, sit down.
Yeah. But no, there was such a large cast at the beginning that I was like, oh God, am I going to be able to do this? And then we introduced the movie and there's like, I would say 5 or 6 people, and then very quickly it gets expanded up to like 8 or so. But then over the course of the movie, we just keep on adding more and more and more until and like you said, the characters on screen, they aren't really hard to mix up themselves. Like if you see them, you can say, okay, I know what this character is going through. But in terms of talking about them, like there's just too many to count.
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, yeah, basic premise is that it's all these people racing across country from somewhere in the desert to Santa
Rosita.
Do you know, I kept trying to remember it because they say it a lot, but I think because I've heard of other Santa, I've heard of Santa Barbara, Santa Clarita, all these other places in California, but this one I'd never heard of other than this movie. So, but they're racing there to get this money, and hijinks ensue.
I will say, you say it's cross country. It's like cross South California. Like it's barely a distance.
I mean, yeah, it all takes place in one day, so yeah, it's not that far, but it's cross country in the sense that they're out in the sort of the desert roads where there's no civilization. Like that's where most of the movie's really taking place. There's a little bit taking place in the city and stuff, but for the most part, it's I mean, I'll put it this way: the distance they travel in this movie is probably similar to like north to south of the entire UK. So to me, it's cross country.
Oh yeah, for Americans that means nothing.
But still. Obviously they keep getting delayed because of accidents and tomfoolery.
Hijinks.
Yes. So I had seen this once before. I saw this about a decade ago when the Criterion Blu-ray actually came out, and I actually watched the longer cut. The version we watched the sort of the regular version, which is about 2 hours and 40 minutes, which is very long for a comedy anyway. Yes. But there was the longer version, which was like 3 hours and 10 minutes, that some of it had been lost for like 50 years when that Blu-ray came out, and the footage is very mixed in quality. Some of it is very rough and doesn't hold up to the very stunning like HD version that most of the movie is. It was very interesting seeing that version, but I think I kind of wish I'd done it the other way around and watched this version first, because this is a complete movie experience, whereas the other one feels that you're noticing all these scenes being added back in that look distinctly different. So fascinating if you're into it, but certainly a little bit, maybe not the ideal first time watch. So
yeah, the way you're describing it, obviously I watched the same version as you did this time, but the way you're describing it, it does sound like, even if it wasn't a lesser quality, it does feel like it may have overstayed its welcome. Like, because there's only so long that an audience can just laugh for. Even if you are consistently funny the whole way through, eventually that part of your brain just tires out, and you're just like, all right, I'm done now.
Yeah, I think that's fair. So but I like I say, I'd seen it before. I'd forgotten a lot of things, don't get me wrong. I actually I'd forgotten about the Hawthorne character, so when he popped up and he started speaking, I started laughing because it all came flooding back to me in an instant. I'm like, oh yeah, the guy who was clearly the inspiration for the dad in Whale Thornberries or whatever. He's here.
That's fair.
So, but the question is, you'd never seen this before, so I'm curious to what your general feelings are.
I mean, you're right. I hadn't seen it before. I remember watching part of Rat Race, so I hadn't watched that in its entirety, but I got the gist of it, of going into this movie. But I think that this is a really, really well done movie. I think that it actually, for a comedy, does a surprisingly good job with both practical and special effects the whole way through.
Yeah.
Like, it's a very well done movie. It doesn't just like say, oh yeah, they're driving and like the rear projection screen is just whatever. It's like, no, they really take the effort to make the rear projection match what's going on.
And there's a lot of stunt driving on location as well. Like,
yep.
Obviously there's rear screen projection for watching the actors doing their dialogue and stuff in the cars, but there's a lot of actual driving too.
Yeah, absolutely. I saw a trivia bit that at this point there was maybe like 100 stuntmen across Los Angeles, and 80 of them were in this movie.
That's quite funny.
Yeah. So, but no, I really did enjoy it. I think my biggest concern going into it was it did seem up top like it was focusing really hard on the fact that this was a star-studded cast.
Sure.
And I was a bit worried that it was going to be one of those movies where they're just kind of playing up like what these guys are known for rather than making its own interesting plot. Like the same sort of way that, you know, you get like a scary movie or one of the spin-offs to those where they cast a celebrity and the joke is that it's the celebrity. And it's not something that if you didn't know the celebrity that you would have been able to get. But this one, maybe they had their little celebrity bits in there, but they were still just funny on their own. Like it worked into the plot. They each had a good comedic bit. It's a comedy that really stands the test of time, in my opinion.
I think this is why we're a good test for this movie, because I've heard a few of the people in this, but I don't know any of them well enough to get any in jokes that those actors had or anything like that. So if it's going to work for us, it's going to work because it works on its own, just as a piece of film. And I think it does. I think it's an entertaining time. I'm not saying every single joke lands. I'm not saying every single scene is great. I think there's a sort of the early half, I would say, of the police captain. I think his stuff's probably the weakest thing in that first half of the movie. And I get why you have to kind of do some of it to set up stuff that comes later, but it's definitely the least I was ever entertained was whenever it cut back to him. And
I think they could have done like a really cool like airplane kind of cutaway there. Like they could have had like a completely separate, but it's still being entirely over the top. But it is kind of played more straight, I guess, when they return there. Obviously, it builds over the course of the movie, but like you're saying, that first half is just like, okay, this kind of feels like a scene specifically tailored so that the audience doesn't lose track of things. Yeah,
and you know, maybe like I can see the merit in that, but I almost think the movie's just about having fun with the characters all getting into all the chaos, that it doesn't really matter where they are at this point in the map, because even when you see the map every so often, you're not really sort of like, I don't know the layout of this part of the country that much to know like how close they are to this place or whatever.
Yeah, I wonder if it's one of those things where they were, you know, this was directed, this was filmed, everything was in Southern California. So I wonder if they were just like, no, it's going to be really cool that we're going to be able to keep in time with this area that clearly everybody knows about. But then as soon as it hits wide audiences, they're like, okay, it's desert. And
yeah. So yeah, I think that stuff is a little weaker, but for the most part, the comedy works. You know, it's from the 60s, so there's always the chance for some dated elements. And yeah, there's a moment early on. It's this police captain again, actually, where he kind of just eyes up the female police officer who's like walking away at one point.
Yeah.
For no reason. And it's not like it's setting up a running gag or anything like that even. It's just a little moment where the music has like a little bit of flute or something to be like, oh, this sexy lady in a police uniform. How things are getting progressive now in the 60s. And it's like,
progressive
whatever.
as the music literally is playing like a sexy womp womp noise as she walks away.
Yeah, it's playing it for obviously all the wrong reasons, but luckily that doesn't go anywhere, because I was worried, oh god, are we going to get into a really dodgy subplot? But it never did.
Yeah.
It was just that for the most part.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you have a movie of this length, not all the jokes are going to land. I think that goes without saying. Something's eventually going to just fall flat.
Yeah.
I think it is a problem that, for me, and it sounds like you as well, a lot of the jokes that fall flat, especially in that first half, are relating specifically to the subplot of the police precinct. And so it kind of just makes it we're back to this again. Rather than if it were more evenly spread out across the plots, it would be less of that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I mean, that's not to say I didn't like anything in that police stuff in the first half. There is one or two moments I do like, but it's definitely the one where most of the stuff that wasn't working or was less entertaining was happening. So
yeah.
I mean, the cast is obviously pretty good across the board. I think I've heard of Mickey Rooney, right? When he pops up, I'm like, okay, I kind of know who this guy is.
We just did him in an Extra Reels episode, the Middle Eastern one with like Aladdin or whatever. He was the crazy wizard guy.
What's Sinbad and the Dark Knight?
Sinbad, that was
or whatever it was called.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, I don't remember thinking that, but fair enough. So we have him. We have who else did I kind of know? Like, I've heard of Spencer Tracy, who plays the police captain, although I couldn't tell you that much about him.
Yeah, that's the thing. All of these actors, you see them and you're like, okay, like it seems like I know this guy, but as soon as you go in and like really try to drill down on what you know him from, it's just kind of this cultural osmosis thing where it's like he's in a bunch of movies that I know about, so that's probably why I am aware of them to begin with. Yeah,
osmosis is the best word for it. But I don't think there's any weak links in the main cast. That they're all entertaining. They all do a good job of making their characters feel distinct, so that you get the personalities, and because they're kind of paired or tripled together in these little groups, and they have their own little dynamics. They play off of that quite well.
Yeah, I'd say my only critique, barring the mother-in-law, because she is definitely her own character, the two wives that we have are kind of just background filler. Like, they don't really have characters of their own for the most part.
That probably sadly ties into that one little sexist joke, is that the women are kind of like, the only woman with a character in this is the one who's intentionally meant to be really annoying and mouthy, and that's the mother-in-law. All the other women are just kind of there. Like they almost do something with one of them towards the end, but it never really feels like it goes somewhere. It's obviously it's not the focus of the movie, and that's fine. But it is maybe something to be, from a historical perspective, be a little critical of, and sort of point out that no, like half of these male characters could have just been women. There's no reason why half of them couldn't have been.
Yeah. I think that's something that, like you said, it's for the times where it's just not something that they really even considered then. So.
Yeah. And also, again, of the time, very, very, very white cast, right?
Oh, very. There was, I think by the end of this, we had maybe 2, possibly 3 speaking roles for black characters. And like,
they're very minor.
The movie does nothing to establish them as like actual people in this movie.
No. So I think, understand the time that it comes from and be critical of that in a broad sense. But, for what it does present, though, it's a fun... And I think one of the funny things is that when you go to watch a movie that's 2 hours and 40 minutes long, it doesn't tend to be a lighthearted movie. Movies that are that long tend to be super serious. They tend to be end of the world kind of stuff. It's actually kind of interesting watching a movie that's very light for that long, because in some ways it's actually easier to go through it because it is quite light, and it's fluffy, it's adventurous, it's fun. Typically you don't go over 2 hours with a movie like that. Sometimes you really go over 90 minutes with a movie like that.
I mean, the cut that we watched still has built into it an intermission, which I don't know if that was necessary, but obviously with the structure of the movie, they intended there to be an intermission. So I actually was kind of surprised at how much of like, I won't say a climax, but how much of a cliffhanger, how much of like big stuff was going on with all of the different plots as they hit that intermission. It felt like it was a kind of like in the drama movies, if there is going to be like a little cutout or the part where they flash up and say end of part 1 nowadays, that's the kind of feel I was getting for that, where it's like, okay, no, despite it being a comedy, they are still feeling like we're building up these plots. Like there is an escalation to it all.
Yeah. And the intermission, again, it's just kind of the time thing, where if your movie was over a certain length back in this time period, you would just be having one. There was no... Because it was just kind of mirroring the theatre going experience, like plays and things like that, which would pretty much always have an intermission. At least anyone I've ever been to has had an intermission.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I don't think I've ever been to one that's not been, unless it's like a little high school production, and even then.
Oh, for sure, yeah. So, no. I mean, I think we all get into spoilers pretty quickly here, because I don't know how much more we could talk about without...
Yeah, nah. Obviously, the main theme, it is a recurring motif throughout the entire movie. I think it's an okay song. It's perfectly fine as a little instrumental, like, riff throughout as we're doing some more zany stuff. It doesn't entirely overstay its welcome, but I can't say I really recognized any other musical cues being played outside of the main theme. Nothing really stuck with me.
I think there's music pretty constantly, but yeah, I'm not saying anything was particularly memorable on its own.
Yeah.
Yeah, and obviously the movie does have kind of a message. You know, it's about all these characters who get greedy and want the money. You know, it starts off they want to just sort of share it evenly, but very quickly it becomes this dog-eat-dog thing of try to get to it first because no one trusts each other. And I'm not saying it's got like a super serious point to make by the end, but there's a little bit of a lighthearted kind of, hey, maybe we're all a little bit, you know, we're all a bit mad. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, this movie, for anyone who knows, like, philosophy and stuff, it's prisoner's dilemma, which is essentially just if everyone agrees to do the quote-unquote right thing, then everyone will benefit from it. But if even one person decides to do the wrong thing, nobody else benefits. So it's this idea of, can any of them trust each other because they've all demonstrated that they're willing to, like, backstab and sneak behind each other's backs here? And it's just kind of working with that and introducing more and more characters into the mix until you finally hit the finale where, like, there's a good, like, 20 people involved in this by the end.
Yeah, and they do go big for the finale. There's a big, huge set piece kind of thing that happens at the end, which is very silly and over the top. And, like, I almost questioned if I liked it as much as the rest of the movie, but I think what comes after it actually made it worth it. So...
Yeah, I get that.
Yeah, so yeah, we'll get to it. So I think we'll get into spoilers now from henceforth for It's a Mad, 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 Mad World, if you're concerned.
Now, Pete, as I said at the beginning of this, I have no idea how to review this. So I'm just gonna lean back here and just take your lead because I have no idea how you want to handle this.
No, I insist, David.
Oh yeah,
you take the reins on this one.
This is the first time I get to. Anytime we do a rating, nah, David, you got to go first, even though I'd rather go second. But here,
no, I think we talk about the opening. I think that's obvious, and then I think we kind of, as the characters splinter off, we kind of. I guess we talk about each of their individual sort of adventures they kind of go on. Obviously, they congregate again towards the end.
And then whenever there's just swap overs, we just talk about the other plot until it catches up.
Possible. I mean, I don't know if you have to go through it like super beat for beat. Right. Especially since, you know, it is 2 hours and 40 minutes long movie.
Oh, yeah.
There's a lot here, right? That's the first thing. But the movie starts with, you know, there's a car coming down this, you know, winding desert road up a kind of a side of a cliff. And it goes off the road, right? It goes flying. It's this car stunt. You see this car flying off into and this is the thing, because it's 1963, a lot of this stuff is just happening. Like they've got stunt drivers, they're doing practical effects because they have to. And so a few cars stop, right? So the movie starts with 4 vehicles full of people who all get involved in the plot. Because this is the inciting incident. This old man who's driven off the road, all the men from all the vehicles, they leave the wives and the mother-in-laws up there. But they all climb down this hill to get to this injured man who's dying. And the injured man, in his dying words, tells them about $350,000, which is probably over $1 million in today's money.
Hold on.
David's did some research.
Yep.
And he tells them that it's buried in this town, in the park, under a big W. And they all don't know if they should take him seriously or not. But... right away, the movie like sort of sets up kind of the tone of humor that's going to happen here. There's 2 things that happen in this scene where this guy's dying that really made me laugh. One is that they think he's dead, right? To the point where the which character? Benji, right? He's one of the 2 men who are driving together in the red convertible, right?
Yeah. So hold on. Just to break down these characters real quick. We have the captain, I think, or maybe he's a colonel or something like that. It's the guy who has the mother-in-law. He's there with his wife and his mother-in-law.
Well,
and he's like kind of.
I get why you're saying captain because he's got a captain's hat, but
Yeah.
I think he's more defined because we find out that he's in debt because he started an edible seaweed company.
Yes.
That's how I was remembering him. Is he's the seaweed guy?
That's fair. He's a very like shy man. He kind of just goes with the flow and everything. Then you have the dentist and his wife, and
Yes.
they're on their honeymoon. They're about to go on their honeymoon. You have a pair of buddies who's Mickey Rooney and I think you said it was Benji.
Benji's the other character. Yeah.
Yep. Benji. They are heading out to Vegas, and then you have a truck driver who is delivering a huge truck of furniture stuff. And those are the 4 people who stop. That's the group of 4.
The 4 vehicles specifically. Yeah.
Yeah.
So basically, all the men from all these groups all climb down the hill to this guy, and it's Benji who, when the guy seems to die, he takes off his little cap and he holds it over his heart, and there's just a moment of silence, and then the guy just sort of yells and wakes up and says a few more things, and that was pretty funny. But then the thing that really got me is then when he actually dies, he literally kicks a bucket that's there, and this bucket rolls down the hill. And it's just this moment of almost surrealist humor of like, he literally just kicked the bucket as he died.
It's perfect. That was like the first time that I was like, oh, we're doing like airplane levels of humor here. We're going to do the things where it's like a visual gag. All right.
Yeah. It's not full on spoof like Airplane, because it's still, like, I'm not going to say it is like a grounded movie or anything, but it's still adhering to a fair bit of logic as opposed to Airplane, which is just, there's just
people
silly
still
things.
behave like people in this movie.
Yes, I think that's fair.
The bit that really got me was it's a repeated bit throughout this entire sequence where the however we're calling him, the seaweed salesman, every single time he has to describe what happened because people come up and they're like, what happened? Every single time he says, well, he just sailed right over the edge. And he does this like hand movement as he's saying sailed. And it's every time. He does it at least like 12 times over the course of the scene. And nobody ever calls him out on it. He never acknowledges it. But every time he just sailed right over the edge.
Yeah, and I think the thing that makes them realize, or at least give credence to this old guy's story, is that after he dies, these 2 guys in suits show up. And they're very concerned. And they assume they're policemen. I was actually thinking in the moment, well, they've not actually shown any ID. I was actually kind of thinking maybe these are other criminals or something who are also after the money. But everything else in the movie seems to indicate that they are just policemen because there's never any like other thread that comes from it. Yeah. But they're like really like, did he say anything before he died? And they're all just like, oh, he thought this guy was his aunt. Oh, it was all about. But they never mention the buried money. They keep that to themselves. So they tell them to all get lost. They all go up to the cars and they all start moving. And this is actually one of my favorite bits of the movie is where they're all just driving at a nice pace, right, in a line, right, just one by one, and like they're explaining it to like at least the ones who have like a wife, or in the seaweed guy's case, a wife and the mother-in-law in the car, and it's got a cut in between them as they're telling each other like what's going on, and then the other ones who are not having to tell anyone, they're like going, oh, what's a big W? Is that like a windmill? Is that like what does the big W mean? And it's coming between them all. And it's basically just this build-up where, like, no, we can't start, like, going faster because they'll see us going faster. We have to sort of make it look like we're not going for the buried money. So, and it just plays out over, like, 5 minutes of them all just not wanting to be the first one to show that they're actually making a run for it.
Yeah, it's that scene where everyone's just like, oh, geez, that's awful. That's crazy. Well, I guess we all better go our separate ways now. And then everyone starts moving in the same direction, just nervously looking at each other. It's that, but in cars. And then finally at the very end of it, the truck driver fakes like a flat tire or that he's out of gas, so he pulls off to the side of the road as they go around a turn.
Because they already started racing before this part, because it's the mother-in-law who actually starts it, because the mother-in-law hits her son-in-law, Seaweed Man, and tells him to like go faster. So he starts going faster. So then every single other person like behind him in the queue is like, oh, they're going faster. We're going faster now, and they all start going fast. And then eventually it's the truck guy who fakes that there's something wrong, pulls over, and he gets out and he sort of sneaks up around the corner because they're at the bend, and he looks round the bushes as if he's going to just to keep an eye on where they're going, only to find that every other character's got out their vehicles and is just standing there waiting for him.
Yeah, as soon as one of the people breaks away from the group, it's like, what were you doing? what were you planning on doing there? He's like, nothing. But immediately they start breaking down into negotiations. They're just like, okay, look, obviously we're all going for the money. Let's sort out how many shares everybody's going to get.
Yeah, and there's a big debate, like, 4 vehicles, it just split 4 ways, and then, the people in each vehicle just have to, make do with that quarter, and some of them don't like that. It's like, oh, okay, well, there's 5 of us went down to see the body, does it split between those 5 people, and then they share with whoever they're with? And then it cuts away, and we get some of the police stuff introduced, and when it comes back to them, they're like, okay, we each have a share for the people who went down to see him. We also each have a share for the vehicles. We also have a share for everyone who's in a vehicle. And we also have a share for the people who went down to see him and were in a vehicle. And they get to this point where there's like 32 shares. And you get 5 shares. I get 4 shares. And so on, so on. It's getting really complex.
In fairness, based off what I was understanding, because the dentist is the one who like is all up in money and stuff like that. He's the one who's trying to break it down in this complicated way. I actually think his idea was good. It sounds like it was fair to me. Like, it's like, okay, we count shares for how many people were in the car. We count for how many cars there were, for how many people went down to check on the man. Makes sense to me. The only reason it falls apart is because the truck driver's like, he's like, look, you'll get these amount of shares. You'll still have a good amount of money. And remember, all that's tax-free. And the truck driver's like, what do you mean tax-free? Are you talking about defrauding the American government? We have to pay our taxes, guys.
Yeah, how are you going to declare this money exactly on your tax return? Like,
look, whenever I'm walking down the street and I find a quarter, I note the date, the time, the location, and then I report it on my taxes.
Like, they're going to come asking questions if you put, oh, I got 50 odd grand from, finding some money in a case. They're going to want to know about that and confiscate it, you idiot. Of course it's going to be tax-free.
Yeah.
Oh dear.
But either way, at that point, they immediately just like start slowly backing up from each other, and they all hop in their cars, and the race officially begins.
But notably, the cops on the way to the crime scene. One of the cop cars notices, hey, all those people you said were at the accident site earlier, they're all standing talking to each other on the side of the road. And this is actually the giveaway clue to the police captain and co. That, they must know something. They're all discussing something that they've learned from him. And that's why the police captain then says, look, they can't know that we're keeping an eye on them. We need them to lead us to where the money is, so we're going to let them have this race. And that kind of sets up where most of the movie's going to be now, is that they're just going to hang back, watch where they're going, so the characters don't know that as soon as they get the money, the police are going to come in and just take it from them anyway, and also probably charge them for anything reckless they might do on the way there.
And immediately it's like, okay, so they're just on both sides of the road. They're driving other cars off the street. They've got a reckless driving. But the captain's like, no, let them go. Let them do what they got to do. Yeah, there's like
a truck. There's like a couple that's moving, and all their furniture's all like strapped on the back of the truck. It's quite early on where they get driven off the road, and as they're going down the rocky hill, just chairs and like lamps and stuff are just falling off the back of the truck. It's just very comical. It's all very over the top.
One thing that is noted here from the captain is that this guy that did end up dying, he was apparently a criminal, and he basically escaped from jail, and he was on the run somewhere, but they never found the money that he stole, and that's why they're waiting to see where this is going, because he always theorized like, oh, it's in this park somewhere, but we never had an exact location, so they're just going to wait to get the people there and then get the location from them.
Yeah. And the one or two things I did like about the police captain stuff in the first half, there's a bit where he throws his hat accidentally out the window. He's like throwing it at the hat stand and it goes out the window. And I didn't necessarily think that was funny. That was just kind of whatever. What I did like about it though is that the hat's in the middle of the road, and this uniformed cop goes down to try and retrieve it, and all the cars are driving around, and there's just this one guy who sees the hat on the road and just gets this big shit-eating grin in his face, and he veers off from his lane to intentionally drive over it with his wheel, and then just laughs maniacally as he drives off, and the captain's yelling out the window, get his number, and all I could think was, who is this man who saw a hat and just felt like, I have to crush it, I have to just ruin someone's hat right now, and take such glee in doing it as well.
That's the thing. He's so happy about it. Like, he was just driving around totally normally up until he saw that hat, and then he's like, yes, oh, my day has been made.
Yeah, that's it. It made his day. This hat This murder of the hat has made his day.
I mean, again, he seems, just the way that they like frame it, it seems like he is probably someone who's famous that we just don't recognize.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, this is just straight up hat aside, is what this was.
Yep.
That's a word.
Haberdasher side.
I don't think that quite has the ring to it.
Yeah, but hat aside does.
Yeah, that works.
Right. Whatever.
What's another word for a hat?
Cap.
It's not a cap. Fedora side, because it was a fedora.
Oh, okay, that works. Fedora side sounds better.
Yeah, there you go. There you go.
Yep.
So, yeah, they're all speeding off, and quite quickly they kind of start to separate into various things. The dentist and his wife get the idea of trying to charter a plane because there's an airfield nearby. And the other two guys, Mickey Rooney and his friend Benji, they like that idea. They sort of follow them in there. But their car breaks down a little bit because all the dust is getting kicked up at them, and they get late. So the one pilot that's there, who's made a deal with the dentist, is like, well, now I'm the only pilot. You're going to have to go to some other airfield that's like 15 miles away. But I've made a deal with the dentist and his wife. I'm going to take them. And the joke here with them, because obviously the plane's going to be quicker, so they get delayed another way later on, but the joke here is the plane is like just this old falling apart thing, to the point where the woman who's like sort of like pulling some of the cables off before they take off, there's a little what do you even
sign
call it?
Sign of the cross.
Yeah, a little sign of the cross across herself. And it just, the dentist is looking at her like, gulp.
I love the point where the wife is super nervous about flying, and the dentist is like, look, this is fine. This is fine. When was this plane built? And he's like, 1910. And he's like, it's well tested. It's done its time. That's how you can trust it.
Yeah, which, I don't know about you, but hearing a plane was built around the time that aviation was just starting does not fill me with confidence.
But, I mean, if he has managed to live this long, I'm just going to rely off this guy's luck more than the plane itself.
Yeah, somehow this is the least dangerous of the two plane flights we see in this movie as well. So more on that, and right now I suppose, because Mickey Rooney and Benji's whole subplot for this next bit is that they go to this it turns out to be like a fancier like airplane club rather than like a...
It's like a country club sort of thing, like private memberships and drinks all the way.
But all the members have their own planes, and like, hey, we need a plane. He's like, we don't charter flights here. We don't do that. And like, who owns this plane? He's like, oh, that's Captain so and so, but he's sleeping in the lounge or whatever. You're like, he can't help you. And it becomes this thing where this guy's a drunk, and the subplot here is that they have to wake him up. They sort of put him in the shower. They're really crossing a lot of boundaries while they're doing it, might I add.
Oh yeah.
But the joke is that even wants to get in there, this captain guy just wants more booze, and he keeps just asking them to make him drinks, and then he gets annoyed that their Bloody Marys aren't as good as he likes them, or the old-fashioned, whatever the drink he wanted was.
Yeah.
And he's like, no, I'll get up, you take the wheel. So Benji ends up actually sort of manning the plane, and he does such a poor job, and they get like a insane bit of turbulence. I don't even know if is it technically turbulence when the pilot's just
I think that's all on Benji. I think it was 100% perfect weather, and Benji was just like, hey, what happens if I do this?
So the captain hits his head, he gets knocked out, and they're flying the plane, and this is quite a large chunk of their subplot, all the way up until after the intermission, where it's just they're in danger because they're flying the plane, they don't know how to land it. And then when we come back after the intermission, there's a whole set piece where someone's trying to talk to them over the radio, telling them how to land at this airfield, and they almost hit the watchtower at one point. It's a whole big thing.
That was the thing where very obviously it's rear projection of them nearly hitting the watchtower.
Oh,
but
of course,
it's done like that's the thing. I was so surprised at how well done the rear projection this was, because I'm so used to movies using rear projection. It's just like, you're just driving, and it's some nondescript road. They never care about what's actually in the rear view. But this uses that in a way that it keeps the plot going. Like during the chase scenes in the desert, whenever we see a car that's in the front of the line, you can see the rest of the line behind them. It's not something where it's like ignoring the continuity of it.
Yeah, it's always further establishing the race itself and just making it clear who's winning, who's behind who, all that kind of thing. It's always got that in mind. Yeah, honestly, the big thing here with the plane landing, though, other than that they obviously do land the plane, is that the guy who they get in, this old, like, Air Force guy to come in and, like, give them tips, he's a bit of a doofus, and is kind of getting himself tied up in the cables, and he ends up falling over the ledge or the banister, and he's, like, dangling with these power cables that are just kind of holding him up, and he's yelling for help. That's their whole thing. So yeah, that's like 2/3 of their plot, like just in describing that plane stuff.
I will say, in terms of just sheer comedy, I think my favorite was Benji. I think he's just fun to be around. Even if his plot doesn't have a whole lot to it, he's just a fun character. He's got like an Abbott and Costello thing going on with him.
Yeah, he's got that kind of demeanor. He feels kind of like of that era, the way he talks and the way he's sort of panicking because he's trying to fly the plane. He's got kind of like a not a whiny voice, but like he's got like a higher pitch,
like nasally.
Nasally, yeah, that's probably the best way to put
it. But my favorite part with his bit though was because he's the one flying the plane. Once the air traffic control guy tries to hop on the line, and he's like, all right, now it's important that I'm talking to the person flying the plane. And Mickey Rooney goes to head over the headphones, and this guy's just like, what do you mean? I gotta fly the plane and take directions? I don't want it. No, get away from here. I don't know. Something about that just hit me right in the funny bone. I loved it.
I mean, I think this entire subplot of these two lives and dies on those two actors being funny and charming as they're panicking. Yeah. If they didn't make that entertaining, it would probably be a tedious subplot to get through. But because they are always funny and they're all like, them panicking and yelling at each other is entertaining. Maybe not if they went on too long, it may not be. But because obviously we keep cutting away from it and we come back to it for a little snippet here or there.
Yeah, you know, I was gonna say that's the thing, is that because there's so many other plots, we never spend too much time with them.
Yeah, I think part of maybe the unsung hero of this movie is the editing and the structure and the way it does bounce around them, especially because when it builds up to the intermission, it starts cutting between them very quickly, where you'll get maybe just a couple of shots of one of them going on, so it kind of crescendos into the intermission in terms of cliffhanger. But I think it really does, there's a masterclass here on how long to stick with each plot, so that you never get too bogged down with any one of them, and it always feels kind of fresh when you come back to them. I think that's a big part of the art of how this movie kind of works, is knowing when to do that. And I wonder how much that changed from the script. Like how much of this is actually matching how it jumped between them in the script. Because I'm going to assume that once they get into an editing room and they were breaking down what they've got, that they probably started making a lot of new decisions once they saw how things worked when putting it together. Yeah,
I'm sure they play. I mean, obviously everything still needs to make sense time-wise. They have to finish up plots by the time that a meetup happens, but I have to imagine that there was a whole bunch that was moved around just to make it so we're not spending too much time with any given character. And obviously, again, I haven't seen the full cut. I haven't seen the 3.5 hour long version, but I mean, surely they were still cutting around probably just as frequently there.
Oh, I imagine.
Just with more cuts.
So to go back to the dentist, because they were the other ones who took the plane.
Yes.
I think these two subplots that we're starting with are the easier ones to talk about because they don't intermingle as much until right towards the third act. They get to the city quite quick. They're in the town where this park is, right? And they get a cab to a hardware store because they want to get a shovel. And I'm like, okay, that makes sense. And in fact, I don't remember if it did in the longer cut, but I do wonder if the longer cut had scenes of how the others got shovels, because a lot of them show up at the park later on with shovels and pickaxes.
Yeah.
But the only ones who actually get like an explanation of why they got them or how they got them are the dentist and his wife. But, you know, it's not a big deal, but that ends up being kind of their big hurdle, is that they go into this hardware store, which apparently is shut for lunch because it's 12 o'clock. So they just hard close at lunch, which feels alien to us now, but
I was gonna say, I'm like, excuse me, you're turning down profits for the sake of your own comfort? What is wrong with you as a business? Dear Lord.
I can't imagine any place in the modern world that shuts for an hour at lunch.
I mean, there's still like restaurants, specifically smaller ones, that shut down for the period between lunch and dinner.
Oh, that's different though.
Get cleaned up.
Yeah, that makes more sense though, because people go for lunch and dinner, so it makes sense to use that time in between. That said, a lot of them still are just open in between, and they'll just have a quieter period. Well, you know, between the busy sessions, but yeah, that's fine. But then this place shuts down. But they basically barge in, and the owner doesn't realize they've went in, so he actually locks them in the basement by accident. So a lot of their subplot is being trapped in this hardware store basement and trying to find their way out, which leads to a lot of hijinks involving paint spilling on them, involving trying to like axe their way or pickaxe their way through the door. Nothing successful. And there's a point where they're having a conversation where I'm just noticing crates behind them that all say dynamite, and I'm like, why does this hardware store have so much dynamite?
It was much easier to get back in the day, the good old days.
Like maybe there's legitimate reasons why someone would want to buy dynamite in that part of the country for, I don't know, caves and deserts and I don't know, but it feels weird to think. It feels weird to think that the hardware store would just be selling dynamite.
Yeah, I get that. I mean, it may again just be one of those things of the time where all of a sudden people realize like, oh wait, people are crazy and they shouldn't have access to dynamite like this.
Alternatively, this could just be a movie thing. It's just there because it's there for the plot, and this was never a thing.
The fact that there's crates full of dynamite right next to the crates full of fireworks, I'm going to go ahead and say, yeah, that's probably just a movie thing.
Also, why is there fireworks in the hardware store?
It's the 3rd of July. Gonna have a big sale.
Because they set off the explosives at one point, and there's a whole thing where it doesn't go off when they think it's going to, so he gets up and they bicker a little bit about it being safe or not safe, and then obviously the explosion goes off for comic effect, and he gets hit into like the shelves of paint, and he gets covered, kind of like Home Alone 2. This is actually one of the few things that I definitively remember from the longer cut, is that this went on longer, and there was more like shots here of him just getting covered in paint and shelves falling down and whatnot. I can see why it works just taking it out, but I do remember it being kind of generally kind of fun, just all the carnage of the fireworks going off and all the rest of it. But yeah, it gets really slapstick though, because at one point before the second time they set off the dynamite, which is how they eventually get out, because they make a hole in the wall to whatever is next door, and they go through that hole. But the wife begs him, like, please, just one last time before we set off more dynamite, I would really like you to just try the door again. So he goes up the stairs, he swings his pickaxe, but when he swings it back the way, it hits a beam, and the entire staircase collapses, just for, again, more physical slapstick humor. Which is one of the things that is not realistic in this movie. There's a lot of structures in this film that are made of almost cardboard, the way that they just fall apart.
When we get to the truck driver at the garage scene, that entire garage was built out of paper mache.
Yeah, it's funny. Don't get me wrong, I get why they did it, because it's really funny, but the joke is that, no, he just ends up tearing down an entire building with his bare hands, pretty much. But, you know, so this is their whole thing, and that kind of wraps, once they get out of this place, that the one question I had, though, because every so often we cut back to the police captain, and they're getting updates from the people watching things, right? At one point they say, hey, the couple, the dentist and his wife, are in this, they've been locked in this hardware store basement, and like, should we intervene and let them out? And there's this one cop who's like, no, that's not fair. And he's like, what does it matter if it's fair? We're going to take the money off them as soon as like they find it. He's like, still though, we should see who wins, like, fairly. Yeah. And he's like, okay, fine. Which you know, I'm not really critiquing that. That's actually a really fun little joke, to be honest.
Yeah.
What I questioned though is that they get an update a little bit later. Was like, yeah, they've been setting off explosives and fireworks, and they still can't get out. And I'm like, how do you know about the fireworks? You're not in the basement. Like, can they hear them? Can they hear from outside?
It's a firework. I'd have to assume they could.
I don't know. It felt like they had very specific information about what was being tried in that basement.
Well, I mean, I guess that's the part that even from the beginning of the movie I was confused about, is that the only person that they ever actually identify or have him identify himself is the seaweed guy. Like, he gives his full name and address, and they're like, okay, just in case we need to reach you, give us that. But nobody else gives their names, but this police captain is just immediately aware of all of their identities and who, like, all of them as they're making their way through, including people as they join the group later on through other plots.
Yeah, that's a bit weird. Well. I would give some benefit of the doubt to a point and say, well, they probably got all the license plates, and that at least gives you some of them. Maybe not every person, but it gives you the owners of the cars, I guess.
But like, it also gives the mother-in-law, once they get the brother-in-law involved in this, it gives him as well. It gets the cab drivers. It gets the random guy to the truck guy.
What you don't realize, David, is that they're living in a Big Brother state, okay? This is surveillance,
Yeah.
24/7, everywhere, all the time, right?
Yeah. Oh, by the way, sorry, I was just clicking through my tabs here. I forgot to ever tell you. $350,000 in back then money has multiplied tenfold today. It's now 3.5 million.
I would enjoy $3.5 million. If anyone would like to give me such a fund, I would.
Next Patreon goal.
I was actually sitting thinking about, like, just because obviously $350,000 is a lot of money, but it's also not a, like, astronomical amount of money either. It's kind of in like that would be a really nice bit of money to get, but it's not going to necessarily be like forever changing your life money.
I would buy a house and pay off my debts, and I probably wouldn't have much left after that.
But I was thinking, like let's just say you were renting, right? Like, how many years of rent, giving like typical price, would that last? And I was just sitting doing math in my head during one of the scenes and going, oh yeah, I could probably get like 40 years of rent out of this.
Yeah, that's the thing. You wouldn't ever have to worry about a living situation ever again, but you'd probably run out of money just off the living situation.
Yeah. I'm just like, if you've said, like, I'm not going to do anything fun with it, that's just literally going to pay rent for like most of my life now, and I'll just earn money for all the other stuff. It would probably make life a bit more comfortable.
But now that you know that it's 3.5 million, I mean, that changes things.
It does change, yeah. I was thinking 350 grand in today's money. Obviously, if you're translating it to 3.5 million, yeah, like, I could probably make that last for...
Yeah. It also makes it a lot, I don't want to say less understandable, but like, when they were talking about splitting 350 grand, like 8 ways or something like that, I'm like, all right, at a certain point, that does get to a point where it is not a lot of money, depending on how many people you have to split it across. But if we're talking about, 3.5 million and you have to split that 8 ways, that's still a good amount of money. That's more than $350,000 a person. Yeah.
Even if someone just wants to give me 100 grand, I'd be quite happy. Okay.
If I could take $5 for the bus, man, just whatever. I don't get to see the Patreon money. Please, anybody.
Hey, in this economy, the Patreon money needs to double, quadruple, and maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, that's true. In fairness, I'm still paying into the Patreon, and I'm not seeing the Patreon money. So this is kind of like a Ponzi scheme to some extent at this point.
That's not entirely true. Technically, you see the amount you give to it before it goes into it. So you see some of it.
Oh, all right, fair enough.
You see it and then you give it in, but you've seen it. You've held it in your hands.
As I put in the money to my bank account, I say, "This is Patreon money. Goodbye now."
For the record, I don't make David do that. I just want to make that clear for anyone who's sitting there.
Oh yeah.
Shaking their head, thinking I'm being a monster. David is under no obligation of anything, might I point out.
Honestly, I just kind of take the fact that I gave into the Patreon as the whole reason I managed to have like 6 shows with you now. So I don't want to mess up a good thing.
Anyway, so I mean, basically that was the dentist and his wife's whole plot, was being trapped in the basement after the plane flight.
The third act.
Yeah, because when they get out, they grab the cab driver again. And, so both of those plots with the two planes, and they're very different, but by the time they get to this point, they both show up at the park first, which makes sense because they both got plane rides. They should get there first. And they both show up with the cabs. So that's, we'll get to that when we get to that part of the movie.
Yes.
So the poor truck driver.
His name is Pike.
Pike, yes.
Truck driver.
Yeah, that's actually one of the few names that I think I heard be said a few times, actually, was Pike. Hawthorne's the one that I remembered the most, but Pike, I think, did come up.
It's just such a standout. It's like Algernon Hawthorne or something like that. It's such a standout name.
This bloody country.
I'm sorry, you talking about America? How dare you?
This country's so obsessed with bosoms. I swear, if everyone stopped wearing a bra, the entire place would collapse.
No argument made.
All the boobs would collapse out of their shirts, at least.
But
anyway, so he actually kind of doesn't team up, but he's with the seaweed guy and his mother-in-law, right? I think from here on forth, when I'm referring to their group, they're the mother-in-law group, right?
That's fair.
But
I mean, the mother-in-law does at some point dip out, but yeah.
Well,
I know what
obviously
you're saying.
things will shake up at a certain point.
Yeah, but no, it's as the other two are making the turn off for the airplane, the mother-in-law group like breaks suddenly, and then the truck guy crashes into the back of them, which then causes all the stuff in the back of his truck to like crash and fall apart. So now at that point, they kind of work together very briefly here.
Yeah, both their vehicles have basically been rendered out of commission, right? So they're like, okay, we have to work together, and like, hey, there's a bike in your truck, take the bike. And he's very self-conscious about it because he feels like it's a little girl's bike.
It is a little girl's bike.
Yeah, but like a 12-year-old girl's bike, not like a 5-year-old girl's bike.
Yeah, that's fine.
So it's a little bit better. So
it's
like,
smaller than it should be for him.
Yes. So they say to him, go ride off and find, help to come back and fix the one of the vehicles so we can get on our way. We can work together. But when he's away on the bike, they basically flag down a car, and then in comes the best character in the movie, right? Sir Nigel Hawthorne. His name's not Nigel. I'm making that up because it sounds like he should be called Nigel.
It's Nigel Thornberry. You said it earlier. Yeah.
I haven't watched that much of that show. It's just what I thought of when this guy showed up.
You're right. Yeah.
But he collects cactus, and he tells them all about collecting cactus. And they kind of put up with them a little bit, and they're going down the road, and they're passing by Pike on his bike. Oh, that rhymed. I didn't even mean that. And like they're all, we should just pull over and pick him up because he's kind of with us. And the mother-in-law, who's just the troublemaker of the whole movie, is like, no, don't pick him up. It's his fault we crashed in the first place. And I'm like, I'm pretty sure it was your fault that you crashed in the first place.
I love one of my favorite little gags was as the car just flies by Pike, he just stands there and he gets a sad frown on his face. And it's not like played for a joke. He's just like actually hurt by the fact that they left him behind. And I was like, oh, buddy.
Yeah, and we'll stick with Pike. We'll go back to mother-in-law and Hawthorne in a bit.
Yeah.
We'll stick with Pike because this guy gets screwed over the most out of anyone in this movie because then he flags down a car, right? And it's this guy who's, is this Meyer?
This is Otto Meyer.
Yeah.
I'd say better name would be Sleazeball.
Sleazeball, very good. He pulls over. He doesn't really want to help him, and he's like, "No, I don't really care." Until Pike starts talking about lots of money, and he's like, "Oh," and he literally. This is a really good bit in the performance. Actually, is the actor licks his lips and kind of leans in, and is like, "Oh, go on, I can be gullible. Tell me more about this." Yeah. But all that happens here is we cut back to them. And as soon as he's done telling him about the money, he's like, let's make a deal. Well, you drive me and we can split the money 50-50. And they shake hands on it. And he's like, hey, just move that bike out from front of the car because, one we have to
trip
move.
On that.
But someone can trip on it. He's like, yeah, sure. So as soon as he goes to move the bike, he just drives off and leaves him there.
Of course.
And you're just like, oh god, he's going to be furious. He's going to. So he has to get the bike back out of the bushes that he just threw it in, bend it back into shape, and sort of struggle along. It just so happens that the sleazeball's hubris gets the better of him because he gets a flat tire. Right? And this is actually one of the few things where there's not really like a cause of it. It's just sort of luck that he ends up kind of getting a flat tire.
Yeah, that's pretty much everything that happens to these people is through either the selfishness of other people or their own stupidity.
Yeah,
and this is the one thing that's kind of just its own standalone like act of God to screw this guy over.
But and arguably it's fate because he deserves it, right? Because he is, the way he just screwed over Pike is really monumentous. But he sort of hobbles along in the car up to a service station and he's like, hey, I need help. I need a flat tire, and he's changed and fill it up, and he's really agitated. He wants to go quickly and he's really moving. And eventually Pike wheels up to the station and sees him there and comes over, and immediately the sleazeball starts yelling that he's an escaped mental patient to get the workers at the service station on his side, and they do think he's crazy because he keeps going after Sleazeball and throwing him around, and he hits him into like a window at one point, and the glass is breaking. Yeah,
but they eventually run enough interval. Oh, he also like tears off the car door as well.
Oh, it's very casually
rips it off. Yeah,
which I didn't think was very funny, but what I did think was funny was that Sleazeball then picks up his car door and puts it in the back seat.
Yeah.
That to me, that's what made it funny. It was that visual of him riding his car, like it's a convertible, right? He just sort of just throws it into the back seat, and I'm like, that's actually kind of funny. So,
but the service station guys eventually hit him over the head with a bottle and knock out Pike, so the sleazeball can start getting away again.
Yeah, who actually kind of just veers off into his own little plot thread. Pike, on the other hand, wakes up from being knocked out, and they're taping him to a chair, and he's very upset about it. So he kind of hulks out of it by like running towards the wall, and I do appreciate that. Well, it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense that he gets his arms out of the tape, to be honest. I do appreciate that half of the damaged chair is dangling from his back, like for a lot of this, because it's still stuck to him. But all I can describe this next like 2 minutes of is just, we built a set out of the thinnest wood we could possibly find, and we're going to let this guy just completely destroy it by like chasing after these two buffoons and smashing through walls, through windows. I did notice a cheeky little jump cut that wasn't meant to be. It was meant to be like a secret cut. There's a little moment where the two guys like roll under the garage door. Oh, yeah. And then he rolls under it as well. And then the camera just sits there. And I thought, the joke's going to be that they're going to come flying back through it. But right before the first person does come flying through it, there's a little cut. You can tell that they didn't have it set up to do it in the same shot. They had to kind of try and fake it, which I'm not really critiquing so much. It's just like, I noticed that. I noticed that movie. You're trying to pull a fast one on me, but I noticed that cut.
I didn't notice that one the first time around, but there's a later one that it was much worse and much more noticeable than that.
Yeah. It happens 2 or 3 times in the movie.
Yeah. But no, this garage, I love this sequence though, because there's one point where the owners of the garage, basically they're freaking out. They're like super scared of this guy because he is able to just absolutely destroy them. And they each run into a separate bathroom. Like there's a men's room and a women's room. Each of them go into there.
Well, they're like, what do you call it? Porta potties. They're not like rooms. They're like outside.
Like conjoined as one building. And like within seconds, this entire little building for the bathrooms is just demolished. It is 100% taken down. And it's obvious, you can tell that like there isn't even a back wall to this thing as they're tearing it down. But it's just funny to see how much damage this guy is causing in an effort to just get away. Yeah,
and they chase them back in. I think there's something where he slides in towards the end, and it causes he slides one of them into like a series of tables and shelves, and they fall over. But eventually when he leaves and he sort of like knocks over one last pillar of the garage or the service station, and the final parts of it come crumbling down, he steals their tow truck, and that's what he's got now. He's got a tow truck and he's in pursuit. He's going after the money on his own. Although, to be honest, I think you could argue that his motivation for this next like rest of the movie is equally getting revenge on the sleazeball as it is about getting the money, because he seems really concerned about finding him as well. Well, that was when they did the crash into the seaweed guy. He specifically like was saying like, no, I've messed up my job. Like all this furniture's broken now. I need to take care of that. So it almost seems like he's bowing out of the race at that point, but then he just keeps getting screwed over to the point where he's like, nah, screw that. I'm going to get my revenge. Yeah, I'm getting my revenge, and my revenge involves taking that money for my goddamn self. I'm not having any of you assholes to deal with. So that is... So that's Pike up until the point that he reconvenes with the seaweed. Or no, with the mother-in-law. Yeah. This is where it gets a little bit more complex. I guess before we get to that stuff, we'll just mention Sleazeball, because he kind of has his own thing for a little bit, which is where he kind of picks up a hitchhiker. There's a guy on the side of the road holding the box, and he's like, "Oh, sir, can you help me? My wife, she's sick, and this is medicine. I gotta get it to her. It's just up ahead." And he's like, "All right, fine, sure, whatever, let's go." Very begrudgingly, but I guess you could argue this gives him a little bit of humanity. I mean, tiniest bit, but yeah. But it's like an off-road location, so he directs him off-road to this little, shack that's in the desert. And then he can't get up this steep hill again to get back out. And the guy's kid that he just helped is like, hey, I know like another way back to the main road. So he gets in the car and directs him to... well, before he even gets to the water, there's a really steep downhill part. Which, again, is a really fun practical... Like, there's this big wide shot of just watching this car go down. Like, I'd be shitting myself going down this hill in a car. It's so steep. Absolutely. This is, I think, the steepest hill you've ever seen in one of those San Francisco driving scenes, and then, like, double it. I mean, think about... Well, actually, I'd compare it to a roller coaster, like how steep a roller coaster drop is. That's what it looks like.
Yeah, there's no breaking. We'll say that much.
Yeah, but this all wraps up for the intermission where he has to drive across what's supposed to be shallow water. And I guess if you've got like a big Jeep that's designed for this type of off-road stuff, maybe you can cross this bit of water. But his little convertible just immediately starts to drift down the river.
But one of my favorite bits is the kid. He walks across the river and it's only up to like his ankles. And he's like, come on, see, no problem. But then as soon as the car comes in, he doesn't follow the same path. So it just immediately sinks. Like, it's so much deeper. And he's like, oh, you kid, I'll get you.
It's a really good shot, though, because it's like the car's sinking and he's not really moving and it's a convertible. So he actually sort of goes, like, his head goes underwater while he's still trying to drive it. So it's a really funny image. Like, anyone in real life would abandon the car long before he does. But it's a really funny visual to see him just still in the driver's seat as it's going under submerged water.
Oh, yeah, he's committed to the car. There's nothing saving that. But yeah, he does end up getting out. He heads off to the main road, and he basically flags down a car being driven by Don Knotts, of all people. I don't know if you're familiar with him.
I do not know who that is, no.
He was the like deputy on the Andy Griffith Show. That's his biggest claim, but he's a famous comedian. Okay. And he starts driving along with Don, saying like, hey, I need to get to this park. And then, because of other stuff going on at this point, a police helicopter ends up following this car. And immediately Sleazeball is like, geez, they're on to me. Look, I'm telling you this. I'm a secret agent. This is the enemy. They're after me. You got to get into that cafe up there and call this number. Don't worry, you'll be safe. They don't know you. And he just terrifies this guy into essentially giving up his car so that Sleazeball can steal it.
Yep. Just continuing pattern of behavior from this asshole. I think it's funny because it actually is a police helicopter that is following him. This is one of the few times in the movie where you actually see the evidence that there's people watching them, because a lot of the movie it feels like they just miraculously know a lot of things as opposed to actually seeing like how they're being watched. But he uses it to his advantage and just steals this guy's car. Which is funny, don't get me wrong. It's when you realize what he's doing and he's using it to trick this guy, it's like a fun little character beat. And then that's basically him, kind of like, he kind of does get into a bit of a race at one point, but for the most part, that's his plot up until they get to the park. Yep. So
then comes the hard part of Pike and the seaweed salesman and Algernon and all of them.
Well, I think we go with Hawthorne and Seaweed Man first.
Okay. Well, the very first thing that happens is as they're driving, as Algernon's driving the car, all of a sudden the mother-in-law freaks out and she like smacks Algernon in the back of the head. And it turns out that her son lives like just down the street from the park. So she's like, we get to a phone, we tell him what's up, and then he'll just go there and dig it up before anybody else can. And everyone else is all for this plan. But every time she calls him, he's in his underwear with this random woman just dancing their hearts out and refuse to answer the phone.
I think what you're failing to mention here with this dancing your heart out is that I am doing the dance that the woman's doing the entire every time we see this woman, she's just doing this very kind of stereotypical 60s dance where the Tutti Frutti, I believe.
I don't know. I call it the shake, but I don't know. It could be anything.
Anyway, it's like she's just so serious, and this guy, the son, is just dancing around her. I honestly, I think what they were going for here, without making the movie like X-rated for the time it came out, I think they're meant to be like hippies, and they're meant to be high off their tits. But this movie's not going to admit that, so it's just kind of implied that they're completely off their head.
Yeah, well, Seaweed Man specifically says, like, to Algernon, like, yeah, I wouldn't trust the son too much to get anything done. He's kind of a failure at everything.
Yeah. So yeah, basically, so there's a lot of the motivation for the mother-in-law is to try and contact her son, who keeps not answering. And when they're trying the first time to call him, it's the Seaweed Man who says to Hawthorne, hey, like, this is not a good idea. Like, if he actually finds out about this, he'll probably just go and get the money for himself, and none of us will see a dime of it. We should like abandon this whole plan. And when he suggests this to the mother-in-law when they're back in the car, she gets very defensive, which does lead actually to one of her funnier bits. Just to skip ahead slightly, is that eventually when the son does find out about everything, and he just doesn't listen to half of what she says, and instead of going to where the money is, he starts like making his way to where she is because he thinks, oh, I need to go protect my mother. She just starts yelling about how he's just as useless as his father, and that was really funny to me because like this entire part here with Hawthorne and Seaweed Man is that she gets so offended that Seaweed Man suggests that her son's a screw up, but the second later that the son does the thing she doesn't want him to, then she starts saying all the exact same shit about him.
Oh yeah,
that's
absolutely.
the joke. That's what's funny about it.
It's that mindset of like, you can't talk about my son that way. Only I can talk about my son that way.
But she's such a problem here that she insists they pull over. She steals the keys, like Hawthorne's keys, and Seaweed Man's like, hey, that's not even our car. This is his car. You can't just steal his keys. And they get so frustrated with her, and she puts the keys down her blouse, and they're like, come on, give the keys back. We get this outrageous scene where Seaweed Man and Hawthorne, who are becoming quite buddy-buddy here, pick her up, flip her upside down like school bullies, and shake her until her keys come out of her blouse.
Yep.
And part of me was just thinking, there's something kind of wonderfully surreal that they think this is less violating than just putting their hand down our blouse. Because this is what they're trying to avoid. They're trying to avoid doing anything that could be construed as sexual.
Here's the thing. I agree, but I also think that just based off of how awful of a person she is, they would feel violated doing that.
It's a very good point. It's a very good point. And of course, Seaweed Man's wife, the daughter of the mother-in-law, is like, stop it, this is psychotic, what are you two doing, you're shaking my mother upside down. And eventually the keys come out, and they're so upset with what they've done, and the mother-in-law is offended by everything, so they're like, oh, we're not getting back in that car. So Seaweed Man abandons his wife and mother-in-law to go with Hawthorne, who are now a two-man team to go get this money.
And they essentially stay a two-man team the whole way. If we continue with their plot, the only thing that really happens is at certain points throughout this, they start insulting each other's countries.
Yeah, Seaweed Man basically, we rescued the British of this, blah, blah. Like, the entire regime would be sunk if it wasn't for us. And he's like, you have a problem with the British Empire? And he gets all antsy about it. He's like, no, forget I said anything. But then Hawthorne starts saying, well, it's better than America. And I was joking earlier about the brassiers and all that. Yeah. That's where this all comes in. And it's basically implying that Seaweed Man's getting very offended that he's saying bad things about America. So the next time we see them, they've already pulled over, and they're like basically try to punch each other, and they're sort of running around the car and try to sneak up behind each other and stuff.
It's not even like a good fight scene. It's that comedy fight scene where both of them are too incompetent to really even like land a hit. But whenever one of them does, they're like, oh God, I can't believe you just did that.
Yeah, and Hawthorne's doing that like, come on then, a bit of fisticuffs, come on. Yeah. You know, it's like, yeah, it's all very over the top and cartoony. This is kind of how it wraps up their up to the intermission side for them. Although I did notice a weird sound effect here, because at one point one of them goes off the side of a little hill and you don't see where they land, but they just do like a sort of sound effect as if he's crashing into like plates and stuff. And I'm like, we're in the desert, why is there plate crashing sound effects?
Look, I can't tell you how many times I've been editing something and then I need to go through the YouTube free sound effect library, and I'm like, well, I guess metal pipes clanking, that's the best I'm gonna do here.
So yeah, that's pretty much their stuff, and it's still kind of lingering, because when we come back after the intermission, they're back in the car together, but there's clearly just some leftover tensions of this fight that they've had.
It's like, look, we're gonna work together to get to the stuff, but we're not gonna like it. Yeah.
Meanwhile, Pike eventually drives up to where the mother-in-law and the wife is, and they get in the vehicle with him, and they're like, hey, we'll give you a share if you get us to a phone, because my son lives next to this place, and he can get the money, so you can get a small cut. You know, you can get a small cut, and we can all be very happy. And again, it's all very bickery, but when she gets to the phone, as I alluded to earlier, the son just, all he really hears is that the mother-in-law says she was assaulted by her son-in-law and abandoned. Is, I'm on my way. And he just starts driving to where she is, and that's when the mother-in-law loses her shit, because he's not going where she wants him to. And now they have to race, because now that this advantage she had by having someone who lived nearby the dig site went up in smoke. Yep. So I mean, they all kind of converge again because they end up in a bit of a race where it's when the son is driving the opposite direction. So she makes Pike turn around, but then Pike's like, why have I turned around? I don't care about your son. And he turns back around again. And eventually there's a bit of a crash and an accident. Hawthorne and the Seaweed Man get involved as well here.
I was going to say, we get into an entire, like, Mad Max-style battle between Seaweed Man and Hawthorne and Sylvester the son. And I love Sylvester as a character because he is such a man-child, especially as we're leading up into the intermission where it's doing all these quick cuts. The only thing he's doing is he's just gripping the wheel, white knuckle, just screaming like, I'm coming, mama! Oh, what they do to you, mama? I'm going to get you! I love him. He's so funny.
Yeah, because it's when the tow truck has just turned around again. It's the reason why Sylvester, the son, turns around and goes in the same direction is because he sees Hawthorne and obviously doesn't recognize him, but he recognizes his brother-in-law. So he turns around and chases them, and that's when you get the... Anyway, all the vehicles end up or off-road and like crapped out. So we end up with all of these every character we're talking about in this conflict all end up on the tow truck with like 3 of them up on top of the truck, you know, in the back.
Yeah.
And so we get this like sort of 2 rows of people bickering about getting to this money. So we've actually converged like half the characters together here with this set of characters. So, and that's pretty much them until they get to the park.
Yeah, I'd say so. Yeah. There's only like a few things I wanted to bring up here. The first is that second jump cut that I was talking about. I thought it was part of the Seaweed Man's plot. It's actually part of the Sleazeballs one. As soon as he not steals Don Knotts' car, but as soon as he hops in the car, the car drives off screen, and then we have to get introduced to the police helicopter that's following them. So it looks as though it just comes up behind a hill, but it's very obvious that like they had to wait for the rotors to build up and they had to wait to like take off. So you can tell there was a good amount of time passing there, and it's just not a good jump cut, despite the fact it's supposed to be.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah, that's the only one that I really noticed because it stood out hard. The second thing is the ongoing policeman's plot that's been going on in the background. Yeah, the captain. So throughout this entire thing, as he realizes that this case that he's finally going to find the money for, he's talking to his wife saying like, hey, we're going to go on vacation, leave the kid behind because it's just going to be you and me. The kid, for some reason, is super upset about this and is like running away from home, and the police captain's forced to take on phone calls from not only the kid, but also his angry wife at the same time. And while all of this is going on, he's complaining to his, I don't know, second in command, someone who about how pensions for the police haven't been increased since the 30s. So he's actually not going to be able to retire with like any amount of money at all.
Yeah, and all of this is the stuff that I wasn't super into, because a lot of the jokes with the angry phone calls is that he's just got the 2 phones facing each other and you can just hear the voices. That stuff wasn't that entertaining. I think obviously he's starting to get the idea, because when he's looking at the map and they've got the line drawn on it, you can see his eyes start to fixate on Mexico. It's almost like he's getting the idea, oh, I could get the money and I could just cross the border and just be home free and just leave my annoying family and just be on my own at the end of my days. And
I get it in that it's all of the other characters are just immediately like, okay, greed. That was their defining characteristic from when we met them, and it will continue to be until the end. He started out as a good character, someone who was doing this for the right reasons. And so they had to take time to show how he is broken down to the point where he would start thinking about it in those terms. So I get why it's a bit more spread out. But yeah, I don't think that it does it quite funny enough in the meantime to get there.
Yeah, I think honestly never cut either seeing the other side of the phone calls, so I took in more of what was happening with the wife, or maybe if the wife actually showed up at the station to like make his life hell, you could have done more with it to really sell the idea that he wants to get away from this hellish life that he's currently in or something. It's just a little bit lukewarm, so that all the stuff in the first half with him isn't that hot. His whole thing though, as we get towards everyone getting to the park, is he's okay, look, I'm going to go in without a uniform. I'm going to go in just a suit and tie. None of them know who I am. They won't recognize me as a police officer. So I'm going to go in. No, everyone pull back so there's no surveillance. They can't see anyone watching them or anything like that. I'll go in my own, and no one move in until I tell you to. And the reason why he's saying that, of course, is because he wants to get the money for himself, and hopefully get away before anyone realizes what he's done. And that's kind of his goal for the last chunk of the movie.
Yep. And it's also, so we've essentially introduced all the characters. The only ones that are left are the Vegas group and the dentist group. As they are getting to the park, they hire 2 taxi cabs, and both of the cab drivers overhear about this money. So they're also part of this now.
They kind of get involved here as well, yeah. So the dentist and his wife and the Vegas pair, as you called them, they are kind of looking around this park, trying to find where this stuff's buried. And
they come to a truce like right up as soon as they meet up. They're like, all right, we're both here. We both made it. No one else is here. Let's call a truce. We'll each all get 4 equal parts. And they all agree to that.
And they're snooting around, but of course the audience gets to see what the W is before they do, where they sort of like, I mean, I actually kind of noticed it before the end of the shot, to be honest, but once they separate, you see that there's these angled palm trees that make a W, and you're like, that's where the money is. So they're looking around, but eventually the other 2 groups show up as well, and they're looking around, and the whole time this police captain is just kind of walking around, paying attention and listening to them. There's a bit of cat and mouse where Pike's looking for the sleazeball and try to get to him. Which the sleazeball, when they find the money, right? Because it's the daughter of the mother-in-law, right? Which I know that's a weird way of saying that, but she's the one who actually figures out the W thing. Once that happens, the sleazeball tries to make amends with Pike by saying, hey, we'll all get equal shares, but he should get 2 shares because he's the one who came over here. And
the daughter recognized it first, but then she kind of debated with the police captain, not knowing who he was. Like, do I tell him? Like, I think this is stupid and I don't want any part of this. So should I even bother telling them?
Yeah, but by the time they actually get to the park, she doesn't even want to go looking for the money. She's done with this shit. She wants out. And I thought they were almost going to give her an interesting little character arc at the end, but after this, to be honest, it just kind of they don't do anything with it.
Yeah, there's nothing going on. But as she's debating whether or not to tell them, we see that Pike, the truck driver, after chasing around the sleazeball around the park, comes to the realization of like, I see it. It's the W. There it is.
And it's a great shot as well because he's chasing him through the W and then he stops right in the middle of the frame and has this realization and then turns around and looks at it. It's a really good shot.
Yeah. I also really love this sequence because we've introduced so many new characters that like other groups were not aware of, that as they see them walking through the park, like you said, everyone now has shovels on hand. Like as the sleazeball walks by the Vegas crew, everyone's like, who the hell's that guy? Why is he here? Which
works really well because once they start debating, like once they find the money, they've dug through the dirt, they eventually get to the suitcase, the money's in there, and they all start debating about what to do. The police captain says something, and that whole idea that some of them don't realize about who some of the new characters are that have joined up halfway through kind of pays off here because like no one knows who he is, and they're like, wait a minute, I thought he came with you. No, I thought he came with you. Wait a minute, who are you? And then he's like, I'm police captain so-and-so. And they're like, shit. Yep.
Right before that, though, the one bit I like is we have, we had all that talk of shares and stuff before, but literally every character is converged. And the sleazeball takes charge. He's like, all right, the only fair way to do this now that we're all here and the money's been found is we divide this up evenly. And he starts with himself and he goes 1, 2, 3, and he counts the whole way around. And as he hits the end, he's like 17 and he counts himself again. He's like 18. And everyone's like, wait a minute. And they immediately just throw him in a pit that they dug and say, you don't get a share anymore. You're out. And Sleazeball's the one who's actually like, you got to include me or else I'm going to call the police. Clearly this money must be stolen or something. And that's when the police captain steps up being like, why do you think the police would care, buddy? And everyone's like, who are you? Why are you caring so much about this?
And he basically convinces them all that they should go and turn themselves in because it would be better for them. It'll look good for the jury. Yeah. But they all get into the 2 cabs. Not the stolen cars. He says they have to stay here because, hey, like they have their evidence. So get in the cabs, go to the police station and turn yourselves in. But of course, they all notice when they're in the cabs, and they're all bundled because it's too many people for 2 cars. Like there's like far too many characters, so they're all squeezed in really tight. But as they're leaving, they notice that he's driving in the opposite direction. Like, wait, where's he going? And then they all have this realization that he's running away with the money. So then, because keep in mind, like when they get to the park, it's about 2 hours into the movie. There's still a good 35, 40 minutes left at that point. So there's a lot of running around the park, and then when this all happens, it's like, oh, there's still like 25 minutes of movie left. Like, what is the rest of this? And it's them chasing the police captain. We get this car chase. The other cops are kind of realizing, wait, why is he driving 90 miles an hour? Why are the other characters chasing him? What's going on here?
There's back at the police station, the guy he was complaining to about his pension actually blackmails the mayor into giving him a better pension, but
tripled.
He doesn't know about it.
Not even doubled, tripled.
And he doesn't know about it, and they're trying to tell him over the radio, like, Captain, whatever you're planning on doing, you have a good pension, don't screw that up. But they can't get to him in time, so oops.
Yeah, it's kind of, I guess they're kind of going for this thing where if he'd actually just done what he was supposed to, he'd be rewarded for it. But because he gave in and tried to like take the easy road out, or the, you know what I mean? Like, it's almost like this is comeuppance that he almost could have had a much better life than he thought he was going to.
He could have gotten more than $350,000 if he just turned it in.
I don't know if it'd be more than that, would it?
I don't know. They didn't give an exact number, but it sounds like the sort of thing that he'd be able to give up $350,000 for without consequence.
I suppose it depends how long he lives after he's retired. He is pretty old, so maybe it wouldn't be that long. I don't know.
I mean, also, what are the divorce laws back now? Because it doesn't sound like he's going to have very long with his wife at this point.
Oh yeah, true. Oh well, I don't know. But they end up the car chase ends when they sort of corner him in this alleyway. They chase him into a building and up some stairs. There's some fun bits here where like he's trying to be quiet, so they all just stop talking and like listen for him, and they hear a creak and they all start chasing him. It goes up to the roof and then eventually onto this fire escape down the side of the building. He's trying to get away from them, and they're all going out of the fire escape. And I actually thought there was going to be like a little twist here that this building was about to be demolished, because there's an entire group of people down the bottom who a lot of them are wearing hard hats and stuff, and I thought, oh, are they about to like, is that why the fire escape in this building's unsafe, because they're taking it down because it's like getting ready to go? That doesn't happen, but the fire escape does start to like fall off the building, so they're all dangling and shit.
It seems like the building is definitely condemned, like it's all boarded up and everything, but you're right, there are people wearing hard hats, so it does imply that there's something going on with the destruction of this building, but just hasn't happened yet.
So they're all like dangling and like scared for their life, and as they're fighting over the case and they're all clawing for it and grabbing at it, eventually it just falls open and all the money starts pouring down onto the crowd below. I think my favorite part of this is that the mother-in-law, because none of the women chased them up the building. Yeah.
The guys were like, now you women stay here because there's only male stunt performers at this point in the LA. So
that's probably true. The mother-in-law like hits a random stranger with her bag and says, "Don't you dare touch that money." And I'm like, yeah, good luck stopping the crowd.
I mean, it was all, I think it was all in hundreds. So you pick up like 3-4 of those. It's
a good day.
Good enough. Yeah.
You've had a nice find. So yeah, we get this over the top big thing here where the fire truck comes in, extends out the ladder to try and get them down, and the firefighter goes up and tells them, "Hey, one at a time, right?" But of course they're all greedy. They all have to rush each other. They can't just do it on merit. So we end up with this scene where all of them jump onto the ladder at the top of the fire engine, and it starts swaying back and forth and falling off its hinges. And honestly, technically this is where they all die, because everything that happens to all of them should absolutely kill them. And you know, it's very comical. The sleazeball goes flying off the ladder and goes through a window onto one of those beds that then folds up into the wall, so you get that sort of classic slapstick effect with that. I think the thing I would point out about this is that I think the wide shots of this look really cool and fun, and it felt like they put a lot of thought into this, and you can tell the buildings are matte painting and stuff, but it looked quite good. The one thing that doesn't quite hold up is every time there's a shot of like a dummy falling and the camera's looking up at it, those all looked pretty rough. But you know what? I'll give it a pass. It's fine.
Yeah. I think obviously for comedic effect, they're able to do whatever they want here. But there is the point where the ladder swinging, like, it doesn't have any physics to it. Like, there's nothing where it's like, oh, they're swaying back and forth and it's picking up like more momentum. It's just like suddenly it's like totally still, and then all of a sudden just whip to the left and someone goes flying.
Because some people
Personally,
land on it's like a little fountain of water, but it's like a foot of water. Like, they'd still be dead. That water's not breaking that fall.
I was even willing to forgive the water. The part I wasn't willing to forgive is that 3 separate people all land on power lines, and you see them being jolted with electricity. I'm like, no, you're definitely dead.
Actually, there was a bit in the basement section of the hardware store where the husband connects 2 power lines, and you get like this proper full like electric shock thing where there's just this light in the middle of the screen as he's shaking, and I'm like, why is he not dead? This feels like he should be dead.
Yeah, absolutely. But the very final one, and I think possibly the most egregious shot in this movie, good for a comedic bit but not good filming wise, is the police captain. He has a palm tree like frond, like a leaf, that he uses to essentially zip line into a pet store. And as he lands inside the pet store, he gets licked by this dog. But the shot is only like half a second long. So they just do the forward back, like looping thing, where they play it forward and then in reverse. And they do it like 7 times before it fades out. And it's super obvious.
Yeah, that must just be a case of like, you're working with the animals and they only got the one good bit and they had to make it last longer. This arguably I think was a bit too over the top, some of this stuff where they were clearly like dying, but I will admit the final scene where they're all in a hospital room together and they're all got casts on all their limbs and they've got slings everywhere and they all can't move, but they're all just sort of like bickering about what could have been and like how someone ruined it. Like, I actually thought that was a really funny visual gag, and then of course the final beat of it being the captain saying, like, you might all get off lately because they'll throw the book at me because I'm the cop who turned and tried to do all this.
Yeah, and he even breaks it down more. They're just like, well, good, you deserve it. And he's like, yeah, also my wife will divorce me. My daughter's changing her last name. I've lost my pension. Everyone's like, okay, yeah, that's kind of rough.
Yeah, but boo-hoo, I guess. But he's like, I'll never laugh again, and that sets up the final laugh of the movie. Because one of the cab drivers, I think, maybe it was Pike, I don't know, one of them started eating a banana and they threw the banana peel on the floor, and the mother-in-law barges into the room yelling about how they ruined everything, and she slips and falls on her arse, and it makes everyone laugh. Even the captain starts laughing. And it's basically just like, yeah, we're all a bit mad, aren't we? Going along with the movie.
Cue the ending song, which... honestly, there's not even... the credits were at the beginning, so there's not even end credits, but they play the whole ending song again.
This was the days where you only had the opening titles and there wasn't the big list of every credit at the end. That was something that came in gradually over the 70s. So you tend to notice that a lot of movies from this time period and before, when they get to the end, it'll just say the end and that's it, fade to black.
And yeah, I didn't have a problem with that. My problem was the fact that it fades to black and then there's still 3 minutes as they're like, no, we're going to play this song out. We are going to finish the song.
Yeah, much like the overture at the start, this is the one at the end.
Yeah, it just lets people walk out of the theater with music playing.
Yeah, I'm fine with that. If anything, honestly, the movie is so long that it's just nice to get. It's like, at least, okay, I'm finished 3 minutes before I thought I'd be. That's actually a little nice, just so I can get up and stretch my legs, kind of thing. I mean, honestly, it is kind of. I do worry that going through a comedy isn't as interesting to talk about, just because you're basically just saying here's what the funny bits were, and like some bits were funnier than others. You're maybe talking a little bit about the performances or the slapstick. I think at least with this one we got to talk a lot about the effects and how they had real driving, some good rear screen projection, and a lot of the the buildings falling down or the shelves of paint falling down. There's a lot of practical stuff to kind of say, hey, they put a lot of effort into this. It felt like a lot of money was spent in this movie. But still, at the same time, I worry that we're not talking about, like with a lot of other movies, especially Criterion movies, we start talking about the themes and what the movie's saying and how it's sort of reinforcing those themes with certain motifs and certain ideas and parts of the character story. A lot of that isn't here in the same way because it is a slapstick adventure comedy movie. But I think it's interesting to talk about a movie like this because it is so different to those.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Like, if we just solely stayed on this show of, like, and here's why this is the most important movie made in the German Expressionist movement, it's like, okay, clearly it's not as entertaining. But, no, I think that the larger theme from this movie, from beginning to end, it doesn't try to hide it. It is just, don't be greedy. Like, if they all just work together at the beginning of this, it's not even saying, like, don't try to steal the money. Like, that's not even the message. It's just, if they all worked together at the beginning of this, they would have made out fine. But it's only once they started trying to take more than their own fair share that it starts coming back to bite them in the ass. And that's continuously throughout the movie. Like the sleazeball, for instance, he probably could have arrived in a decent time with Pike if they just drove there together. But he wanted more, and therefore he got bit in the ass for it.
And it's also why you don't feel bad laughing at their misfortune, because their own greed is why all this is happening to them. So you never have to go, oh, I should sympathize. Like, no, like they're being greedy. They're comical characters, and we get to enjoy laughing at everything that goes wrong. And I think, you know, it is very well paced, even for how long it is, and how meticulous it is in terms of like all the different segments, all the different adventures they all go on. They're all very varied, and you get to sort of enjoy that. And it does feel like a bit of an epic journey by the time you get to that park, at least in that last half hour. You're like, oh, we have been on a journey here. They've all kind of got here eventually, but you know, it took a lot of trials and tribulations to get here. So
yeah, I always appreciate a good plot, because if you look at sitcoms, most all of them are structured in the way of you got an A plot and then you've got a B plot, and sometimes some shows have a C plot as well. But there's always like a hierarchy to it. You always see this is the primary plot, and then here's the secondary and the tertiary. This movie I'm so impressed by, because not only does it have 4, possibly 5 different plots, depending on how you count it, but all of them feel primary, save for maybe the police captain's plot. That one's the only one that kind of feels secondary. But all of them feel like, no, this is, if you like this character the most, you can feel like it is the primary plot. It doesn't feel like any particular one of them is taking the back seat for the sake of, we just don't have enough to fill time with.
Yeah, and it's the sort of thing where clearly there's an art to this and making it work, because I think a lot of movies have tried to do this, where you've got the ensemble cast, you're cutting around them, and it doesn't feel like there's enough of an overall driving plot. It just feels like a bunch of skits on their own. And while arguably I'm sure some of these things are you can kind of pitch them as individual little skits in various parts of them, I don't think it ever loses sight of like there's an overall goal that they're always building towards with every single character. I think saying this it's a relatively simple plot, but it's actually a very good plot. Like, it's a very simple concept of a movie, is that a bunch of characters find out about buried money somewhere, and despite, you know, pretending they're all going to split it evenly or not go after it, they do all start racing after it, and their own not hubris, but their own greed just gets in the way and causes chaos. And I think when you look at other comedies that try to do the ensemble, or whether it's directly related or even just like an anthology thing where they'll have a bunch of subplots that never interact, and they don't work as well. You don't feel like you've got a full experience by the end. Whereas this does feel like no, it has a beginning, middle, and end. It has a setup, it has the journey, and it has a payoff. And I don't think every single scene is amazing. I don't think every single joke works, but overall, as an aesthetic and as a, you know, it looks very good the whole time is what I mean by that. But overall, as an adventure, I felt like, yeah, this was an adventure, and so much of the characters were likable and easy to watch. Not necessarily likable in that they deserve to get the money kind of way, but likable in a hijinks way. You know, it's fun watching the sleazeball get his comeuppance. It's fun watching poor Pike being screwed over. Hawthorne with his stuffy English accent and attitude.
They're likable in the same way that like Looney Tunes characters are likable.
Yeah,
like they're all essentially, they're not good people. But
a better comparison, if you're going to bring up Looney Tunes, is probably Wacky Races. Like,
yeah, absolutely,
much closer plot wise, at least anyway. So, yeah, no, I think it's a really fun time, and the director has done like more serious movies. Like I've not seen these examples yet, but he did Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. He did Judgment in Nuremberg. I'm not sure.
Is that one not a comedy?
I don't think it's a comedy.
No.
Okay. Unless you've got a really specific sense of humor, I guess.
Yeah, fair.
But I mean, you know, so this is someone who before and after this would do more serious, critically acclaimed movies. But he did this, and I think that's maybe why it holds up, is that this is a more serious director having fun with a comedy, whereas maybe the thing that lets a lot of comedies down is that you've got like directors who are just these workmen who come in to do comedies that are more built around, the star who's meant to be funny,
Right.
or whatever it is. Like, it'd be kind of like if Christopher Nolan said, you know what, I'm going to do a comedy as one of my movies. Now, I'm not saying he would be good at it specifically, but it's kind of like that thing where it's someone who typically does more serious movies still applies their craft and skill to a lighter film. And, whether that's a Christopher Nolan, whether that's I don't know. I mean, I suppose technically David Fincher just tried to do a comedy and it kind of didn't work. But I think that's maybe what's happening here, is that you've got a director who does serious, proper, like, high class Oscar contending movies, but what did this comedy and treated it with the same skill that he would anything else, and as a result, you get a movie that holds up not just in the characters and laughs, but also in just the overall feeling of it being a movie. It feels like a film the entire time.
Yeah, I think that goes back to what I was saying at the beginning of my worry was that this would have ended up a movie that was just kind of relying on star power rather than having its own thing that it was doing. But no, like you said, this director had a vision, that he had a thing that he wanted to do, and it came across. I mean, I'm not saying that it's high art by any means, but it is definitely got a craft to it beyond what a standard, what I would think of as goofball comedy of the era would be.
Yeah, it's like the difference between Adam Sandler and his friends just sort of, let's just do a movie together. So someone whip up a script and hire a director who won't say no to us, and you make grown-ups one or two, versus if you got Adam Sandler and all of his friends, but you give it to, an established director who makes, great movies, right? And
like
you say,
Tarantino.
yeah, like you say, Tarantino, you make the new Adam Sandler movie. And I think stuff like Uncut Gems and, well, that's the one I've seen. I know people like Punch Drunk Love. I've not seen that one. But there's movies that prove that Sandler can actually go and do a proper... I mean, they're more dramatic, admittedly, but it does make you wonder, what if one of his comedies was actually by people with talent who he actually listened to and followed their directions on? They might be great. And, it's I think that's what this kind of is. It's this actual serious... Not a serious movie plot-wise by any means, but a seriously taken production of a comedy. And I think as that, it stands out quite a bit. It's very good, and most of it holds up. Not everything, but most of it does.
I was gonna say, I think that's the shining gem in all of this, is that it could have been so much of like dated humor. It could have been something that really worked for the audience of the time, but then just kind of fell apart afterwards. For instance, the cop who was saying like, the police pension has been increased since 1934. Like, in concept, that could have been something that was just a dated, like, line from the character. But all of us as people understand the idea of not getting raises since, like, forever. Like, it's something that's relatable regardless of the time. So it does a good job of always keeping the jokes still relevant, even if it's something that references a specific time period.
Yeah, it doesn't hinge on anything specific. The concept of, like, we're not being paid enough is still as evergreen today as it was at the time. So
I also really like the idea that at the beginning of the plot, when each of the characters is kind of saying like, here's why we deserve it, not to like other people, but just to the audience, you get the fact that the seaweed salesman business has gone under. You get that the dentist is trying to pay for like a better honeymoon sort of thing. The Vegas guys are obviously going off to gamble. They're not in the best financial situation, and neither is the truck driver. So everyone has their reasons to do this outside of like, well, I'm already rich and I just want to be more rich.
Yeah,
like, no, they are all floundering in their own ways.
On the truck driver, he has a line actually when they're negotiating, when they're working out like their shares. He says, do you know how many like runs on this? Because he always does this. Like, I remember what the starting location was, but he's going to Yuma. And he does this run backwards and forwards. And he's like, do you know how many runs I'd have to do to make that kind of money? And it's suggesting that this is like years and years and years of labor for him to earn whatever his cut would be. And so it tells you he's a blue collar guy. He makes a normal wage, and arguably all of them deserve more than they get, depending on how you want to look at it. But
same thing with the police captain. That's literally his whole plot, is that he feels undervalued in his job, and so he just bails.
And I think, there's maybe something to be said that, they all do deserve more than perhaps what they have. Everyone, in a way, does to an extent. But
but then that's kind of where I wanted the daughter of the mother-in-law plot to go at the end there, because obviously she's upset because she doesn't care about this whole thing. Money's not an issue to her, that she feels like she needs more of it. But I kind of wanted them to go the route of your greed, like, will take these things away from you. In your pursuit of getting these things, you lose the things that you held closer, sort of thing. And I didn't mean, don't send it down a totally dramatic alley, but have it be that at the end of all of this, like, the wife is like super upset with her husband in some noticeable way. And I don't think they ever really touch on that enough.
I don't think the husband ever actually has to deal with the fact that she's decided not to take part or anything like that.
Yeah. And then same sort of thing of Algernon of Hawthorne. His whole thing that he goes throughout this is how, like, the economy of America is all based on like this. And he's just basically tearing down America the whole way through. But then by the end of it, he's got just as much greed as any of the rest of them. But I don't feel like it's ever done enough with,
Yeah, maybe just a little bit more of the satire sprinkled in, so it's maybe saying something about capitalism and whatever. Like, maybe there could be more. Maybe there was some more in the longer cut that I just don't remember because it's been so long. But at the same time, though, like, I don't know if it needs it either, because fundamentally the movie works really well as it does, and maybe the last thing it needs is more stuff to bog it down. But I mean,
that's true.
I don't know. We're making these suggestions, but it works absolutely wonderfully as what it is. And it's a really pleasant watch, even at 2 hours and 40 minutes. I would definitely recommend it. It's not super hard.
Yeah.
If you can't get the Criterion Blu-ray, MGM actually own it, and they've got it up for rental and stuff in a bunch of places.
It's free on YouTube in the US, at least, with ads.
Oh, is it? It's free.
Yeah, it's there.
Fair enough. Well, I guess we're at that time where we're going to rate the movie. David, as we pointed out earlier, you go first.
Oh, do I? Golly gee. I'm not... It's one of those things where mentally I kind of want to put a comedy on a different rating scale than the dramas. Like, it's unfair to judge the two against each other in a lot of ways. But if I'm keeping it on the same rating scale, trying to keep everything consistent here, I'd say that this one kind of caps out at an 8. I think it's solid. I think there's a lot to it. Like I said, the special effects, like the rear view projection, and the practical effects of the car chases and crashes and stuff like that, all of them phenomenal throughout. Jokes had me laughing the whole way through, but it is just kind of, at the end of the day, a goofball comedy that doesn't have a real deeper message to it. It's just a, have fun with the movie as it's presented to you sort of thing. And I think that's where an 8 caps out at.
Yeah, I mean, I gave it an 8, I think, back when I saw it originally, and I think I could be tempted to go slightly up to an 8.5, but I think I'll stay at an 8. It looks great. I think you can still read some messaging in a sort of broad sense of, like, just the idea that it's looking at greed and it's sort of using it for its comedy, and that certainly feeds into the culture that it was made in. You can sort of, like, analyze kind of the world around it based on what people are using in the film to give as comedy and what the characters are incentive for. But yeah, it doesn't really have some big, like, dramatic kind of, like, theme by the end or anything like that. It's just kind of using it as a framework for what it does. But the characters are fun to watch. They're fun to laugh with and at. The overall visuals of the film are very nice, and there's actual practical stunts and stuff. It feels way more expensive relative to its time than any modern comedy ever could dream of. I don't imagine any comedy in the modern world getting this much love and attention in the production that this clearly did. Different world, I guess. A mad one, you might say. But
I might say it 4 times in a row.
So yeah, I think 8 out of 10 is the right score for this. It's very, very good. So. And I think to get into the cut question, where does it land on that scale? I think it makes the cut pretty comfortably.
Yeah, I'd say that. I mean, I don't think it quite makes cut above.
No,
I think that it's like I said, it's great, but it is still, like, kind of limited by the fact that there is only so much you can relate to these characters in a comedy. And it's like, is the greatest Looney Tunes cartoon of all time comparable to, like, the greatest drama short film? Probably not. I think there is still a barrier between the two, but it's great for what it is.
Yeah. So There you go. It's a mad, 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 mad world. That's another episode of the Criterion Cut in the books. Thank you very much for joining us, everyone, and supporting the show. Next month on the Criterion Cut, we're going back to a more dramatic film, and we are looking at Revenge, which is a German film from 2008, which...
2008?
Oh, yeah, this is not an old movie, no. This is
okay.
This was a pretty new release when Criterion put it out on Blu-ray. I think they put it out maybe like 2010 or something like that. So,
okay, fair enough. I know nothing about this one.
Yeah. So something very different. I tried to vary up like what the movies are month to month. Obviously, some of them are votes. Although there's not one of them for a little while. We just had a couple recently, but we're good for a little while now. So let us know what you think of It's a Mad, 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 Mad World in the comments if you've seen it, and hopefully we maybe encourage some people to go check it out if they haven't. Yeah. But something a little bit different for the Criterion Cut. But we'll see you next time for a more dramatic movie. Of course, look forward to extra reels in between. Yes. Next episode of that is a vote winner, so I don't know what it's going to be quite yet at the time of recording, but
it's not going to be good.
Yeah, who knows? As far as what's going on, obviously, I think right now we're in the middle of Ghostbusters season, and
we're just starting Ghostbusters season.
No, we just started that this week. Oh, fair enough.
Yep.
And then obviously there's some new releases coming out on the Ace that we'll be doing, like Dune Part 2. So,
yep.
Thank you very much for joining us. We appreciate it. Keep watching movies, and in the words of Martin Scorsese, this is cinema.